We are headed down the college football home stretch. 2 more weeks to championship weekend. We get Steve Deace on the line from Michigan podcast. Of course, catch Steve's work with the Bigger Ten. That's one edition. And then also, of course, the Michigan podcast right here on YouTube and your favorite audio platform. Steve, how you doing today?
I'm good, brother. How are you?
I am doing just fine. Good to see you. Thanks for stopping by to get some college football knowledge out of you this fine week. Let's look at the college football rankings. They're going to be released a little bit later for us on Tuesday, so we're hitting you up before the actual release, but we can go to more of a conceptual look at it. The SEC race is crazy. There is a strong possibility that we could have 6 10-2 teams come out of the SEC. What would be your criteria in trying to determine these seedings, these rankings, and who gets in and who gets out? What is your best form of meritocracy?
I think we're going to know a lot more after the Ohio State-Indiana game this weekend. I think Indiana could not block Michigan most of that game, particularly in the second half. I would say Ohio State's defensive line is as good as Michigan's, but different. It doesn't. I think Michigan's guys are a little bit more of an attacking style than what Ohio State, I think, presents individually. But I also think Indiana's going to have a hard time blocking that unit. And the problem with this, Mark, is that it's not going to deal with an anemic MAC level offense on the other side. It's going to have a hard time blocking them up front on defense. And then on the other side, it's going to have to probably put up at least 28 points to win the football game, at least that. So I think, and the reason why I bring that up is because it's a great story, but I'm having a hard time seeing the case for why 11-1 Indiana, who if it loses convincingly to Ohio State, is more deserving of a playoff bid than any of these 10-2 SEC teams. And I just say that I'm a Big Ten guy. I'm not down with the conference chants. Like, nothing's more pathetic. You're Arkansas, Vanderbilt. Why are you chanting SEC? You're a subsidy. What is that? Right. But I'm just looking at resumes and I'm thinking, if the situation was on the other foot, what would I think? And I think there's 2 things that would make Ward Manuel, my AD, he's the head of the committee, which really means he's just the figurehead, the guy that has to face the media. 2 things that would make his life a lot easier: Notre Dame losing to either Army or USC, and one of these SEC teams, maybe having 4 or 5 SEC teams go 10-2 rather than 6 of them. Because I really don't get the case for Indiana. Heck, I'm not sure I get the case for Penn State, frankly. I mean, who they beaten? What's Penn State's quality win? So at Tennessee's 10-2, Penn State's 11-1, and Tennessee beats Alabama and they're out. That doesn't make much sense to me, So I don't envy the committee at all. And it's not like the selection committee in basketball. We have this bitching and griping and moaning every year, but it's over teams that, last year you had an NC State come out of nowhere as a 12 seed to make the Final Four. But let's face it, 90% of the time, the teams we're arguing about on Selection Sunday about getting in or not just aren't factors in winning the tournament. In this case, we're talking about teams 9, 10, 11, and 12. And in this year where I don't think there is a clear number 1 team this year. My power ratings show that at the end of the year, Michigan and Georgia both would have been at least a field goal favorite on a neutral field to every team this college football season. I do think teams 9, 10, 11, and 12 with the right draw might be able to win this. And so there's way more at stake in the decision-making process for the college football committee than the NCAA tournament selection committee.
Outside of Indiana and a few other selective teams in the Big 12 and the ACC, my preseason projections weren't that far off in regards to a logjam in the SEC, Penn State being a factor, et cetera, et cetera. Where I missed it was, in no way would I have thought a 11-1 team in the Big Ten would have an issue getting into the playoffs, because obviously that's not been what the history has been during the 10-year run of the 4-team. The 10-2 record, especially out of those 2 conferences, and the respect that they're going to get going forward would have been just a no-brainer. But yeah, 6-5 Washington is the best win. Now on the Penn State, so you're thinking Okay, there's one thing in regards to what you believe should happen and what you would select versus what do you think the committee's going to do. Don't you think that an Indiana competitive game against Ohio State, if they stay within 10 points, something in that range, that's going to be enough for them?
Probably, but here's what I don't like measuring teams off of losses. I want to know how good a team can be. That's why I always measure teams off of wins. Okay, and to me, a truer indicator of who Notre Dame is the season opener at Texas A&M, for example. What they did to Navy a few weeks ago, then a random day in September losing to Northern Illinois. You know, and most people want teams to be judged by their worst. I would prefer to see what is the best, because it's speculative. We don't know, you know, and so therefore I would rather speculate on what I think a team's actual potential is than on a random day what was their very worst day, you know. And so we're talking about a team's best resume being they beat a couple of 6-5 bowl teams and they didn't get depanted by Ohio State. At the beginning of the year, Mark, you'd have laughed at me if I'd have told you that was any, just the name is irrelevant. If I'd have told you that was any team's playoff resume. Now their best wins were a couple of 6-5 teams. They lost to Ohio State by 10. You'd have told me I didn't even need to know the record. That's not a playoff team, you know, and it's not, and it shouldn't be. My guess is though, it will be. And I mean, when you're sitting at a game where you're a double-digit underdog, you're not a playoff team. If you're a double-digit underdog at this stage of the year, you're probably not a playoff team.
So I've not moved completely to your side of the corner there, but I have to a certain extent going from 12 teams from the 4 teams because it seemed like the committee was safeguarding itself against embarrassment by grading what the worst could be, like an Ohio State versus Purdue, lose by 4 touchdowns, still be a 13-1 team that won the Rose Bowl, but you got left out of the playoffs even with better wins than Oklahoma because you had that potential for being embarrassed because there's such magnification on just the playoffs was one day,
Right,
basically. Right. It's a doubleheader, and there's your playoffs versus, looking toward who can these teams be? How good can they be? Penn State's best win is a loss. Their best performance is a loss.
Right.
So I don't go completely to the end where you do, where I'm just rating wins. I do think that we can tell something from losses where Penn State's able to hang with maybe the best team in the country.
Understand too, Ohio State's not even going to be ranked number 1. So
that doesn't mean they're not the best team in the country, possibly.
Well, that's not what I'm talking about. We don't know who the best team in the country is. We don't know the answer to that, number 1. Number 2, if we're judging teams based on losing to Ohio State, this isn't like they're the consensus number 1 team. And they're like better favored over everybody. And we all agree this is some historically great team. And you took UNLV 1990 with 6 NBA players in the rotation down to the wire. I mean, we're talking about a team right now that has a realistic chance that doesn't even control its own destiny for its own conference championship game. And we're saying that's Penn State's best win. We're saying that's Indiana's best win. Now, of course, if they beat Indiana, then they do control their own destiny. But right now they don't. Oregon and Indiana control their own destiny. So I'm kind of, the whole thing makes no sense to me, really at all. There needs to be some form of strength of schedule component. It has to matter. Who you play has to matter. And I mean, do you believe? I don't, but we won't know. But the fact that we have to question, could Indiana go 10-2 with the same schedule as any of the 10-2 SEC teams? But we're pretty confident that any of those 10-2 SEC teams could go 11-1 or better with Indiana's schedule. I don't get it. And moving forward, I don't think it's a good way to choose teams. I don't.
Well, it's been the way that we have chosen teams. It's just the dynamic of how many are selected has changed this considerably. If Ohio State had Indiana's resume, they'd be in the playoffs and few people would be questioning their resume because we would believe in the talent. We don't believe in Indiana. They have to go out and prove something.
Yeah, I mean, there is some truth to that. Sure.
The thing that I would put on Indiana's side,
26 yards against the worst Michigan team in 16 years. That's what I watched.
Yeah, well, the second half was ugly for Indiana, less than a yard per play, no doubt. They have been consistent, though. I'll give them this: they've had game control, they've had blowouts. If you would have told me Indiana was 10-0 at this point, I would have just thought that they had scratched together a ton of 31-28
Fair.
wins against everyone. They've had game
Fair.
control until they played Michigan, and they had game control technically, but of course they squeaked through with a win. So you have counted out all possibilities of the Big 12 or the ACC factoring in with a second team.
Yeah, no way. I don't see it at all.
Miami.
Can you explain to me why SMU is in first place in the ACC and the committee is putting Miami in that spot? Can you explain that to me? I don't understand that. Can you?
Well, I think there's a difference between it's a double standard. They're going with the rest of the rankings. They're going with what's currently going on right now to date. But with SMU, they're projecting a loss.
How can you project a loss? How can you project that?
That's what they're doing. I don't agree with it either.
Yeah, because SMU, because these are a snapshot of where things are each week, correct?
Yes.
If we're going to project things, then only put one out and see how it plays out and then correct it. But if it's a snapshot of where things go every week, SMU is in first place all by itself in the ACC. So why are they not in the ACC spot? That doesn't make any sense.
I think it's part of what I've just mentioned, but it's also that they're just flat out ranking the teams. And so then when the seedings correspond to the rankings, Miami gets thrust into that number one spot in the ACC.
So at the end of the year, if the Miami is ranked ahead of SMU, but SMU wins the championship, they're going to change the rules and Miami goes in that spot. And no, they're not going to do that. It does. I know your explanation is correct. But your explanation of their explanation is what sucks. Yes.
Yes, because we're going to have a year. The way these leagues are shaping up, especially
this, my whole point in this thing and bringing that up and connecting it to my previous conversation, the games should count. And if you play harder games than other teams, and I'm being a little self-serving, frankly, I'll be honest, because I'm anticipating that we're going to greatly improve our roster here this offseason. And we won't be 6-5 into perpetuity. Well, we've got non-conference games against Oklahoma, Texas, Notre Dame, all lined up in the next 6 or 7 years. I'd kind of like to know those games matter then. So don't schedule those games. Play Charlotte, I guess, is the message here. Don't schedule those games. Play Charlotte. Play Western Illinois. Play those teams instead. Go 11-1. Look good doing it. I mean, we're going to punish all these SEC teams for the fact they're all good. I don't like that. I don't.
And that's one of the reasons why the committee's not going to have an issue leaving out Indiana, and they're not going to have an issue defending it, saying Indiana should have scheduled somebody non-conference like just about everyone else did. Mm-hmm. Back to the point with the rankings being wrong based on the first place current team in the ACC. I foresee this being an issue, especially in the Big 12 going forward, if this league stays to be balanced as it is, where we're going to have a BYU type team struggle through a season, make its way, get bounces the right way. Maybe they arrive at the championship game undefeated, and then the Iowa States of the world go 9-3, pull off an upset in the conference championship game, and the committee is still going to rank the loser of the conference championship game ahead of the winner. However, they're going to have to promote the winner into a top 4 seed, and the loser would be higher ranked, but not even make the playoffs.
Yeah, so they're going to create a scenario, which they don't have to do, where higher ranked teams don't make it that are in the top 10. That's just stupid again. Again, the game should count. All right? The game should count. If 9-3 Iowa State beats 11-1 BYU, they should to be 10-3, and BYU's 11-2. They should be ranked higher than BYU. They just played a game on a neutral field to decide the game. The games should actually count. The game should count.
Steve, you started to veer off into Michigan talk and preparing for a big off season going into next year. Has the response to this season and the calamities on offense and elsewhere and the coaching failings, have you been pleased with the response? We see NIL, we see recruiting headed in a big direction. Are you satisfied?
I am, because what it shows is that Michigan, if Sharon Moore fails here, it's just going to be because he cannot do the job. That Michigan, I told you before, even the Bryce Underwood stuff, that Michigan had already allocated and budgeted. It was going to spend an Ohio State level of money. We're going to be the Ole Miss of this year's transfer portal. Mark my words. That was going to happen even before the Bryce Underwood thing. And the Bryce Underwood thing's a unique thing. That's one unique donor, not Dave Portnoy. That's one unique donor who's been brought forth because we're dealing with essentially the greatest quarterback recruit the state's produced since Drew Henson. He's way ahead of Dante Moore from even a few years ago, or CJ Carr. Bud Elliott at 24/7 Sports says Bryce Underwood's the closest thing to Cam Newton he has seen since Cam Newton. I talked to a guy Saturday night, a former college football assistant coach with a lot of experience scouting players and high school recruiting and breaking down high school recruiting film. He told me Bryce Underwood was a LeBron James of college football in terms of where he's at 17 years old and where LeBron James was. So I think that's just a unique situation. So sometimes you're seeing some Michigan media, some Michigan fans, well, we should be spending that money elsewhere. This is a separate fund. This is Michigan, guys. They're not short of donors. We're good. Okay, I don't know if you guys have been on campus, in the last 55 years, but they're not going through couch cushions for change. They're going to be all right. They're going to be okay. They got this. All right. So this is a unique situation where an ancillary donor was brought in specifically for the intent purposes of putting together the kind of deal that Bryce Underwood simply cannot say no to. And I don't believe that he will. And I've been saying for 2 weeks, and I'm going to maintain this until signing day, I need to see a signature of Bryce Underwood and his family on a letter of intent to Brian Kelly, not taking, 8 figures guaranteed up front as an insurance policy. And yes, if Michigan cannot develop him, would he be leaving tens of millions of dollars on the table in the NFL? Yes. But the earliest he can collect anything from the NFL is the summer of 2028. That's a lot of water under the bridge, Mark. That's a lot of times a non-contact Achilles injury could happen, and you're never the same player. That's a lot of practices and games where your spine snaps and you're never the same player. I will believe they're turning down 8 guaranteed figures up front. I'm going to need to see a signature on an LOI before I believe that, because I don't believe they will. I don't. I think he'll end up at Michigan. And I think that's what your school did this last offseason with guys like Caleb Downs. Those are the opening salvos across the bow of the SEC. And this is something I think your audience really needs to understand about what bringing this stuff above board is going to do in leveling the playing field. Because the reason why the SEC did such a great job buying players before is because the SEC, and if you work in Republican Party politics like I do, you encounter a lot of the Southern donor base. And there's a reason why Democrats always have more money than Republicans, because their donor bases come from land grant schools like Michigan and Ohio State, where they're captains of industries and tycoons. And down south, where the Republican donor base is, it's guys that are very wealthy, but it's because they own like 50 car lots. You see what I'm saying? Or one fast food chain. It's not the same thing. It's just not. And so when you can get a great quarterback for $250K and the Big Ten schools aren't bidding anything, that's a lot of money, right? You're the one paying top. But what happens now if it's 10 million? The state of Louisiana is broke, has been for several years. They don't have that kind of cash. If schools like yours and mine truly, as yours did this, proved this last portal season, if we decided, all right, if those are the rules, I've got an account. They can't. Those schools down south cannot compete with the resources up here. They can't. Not even close. Now they're going to still have the inherent advantage of those players are parochial to their era or their area and local, and they'll have some inherent advantage for that. But the idea that Georgia and Alabama every year now and are getting 9 5-stars and Michigan's not going to get one, that era is done. That era is not happening anymore. And Bryce Underwood is the first salvo. I mean, we just flipped a kid from Georgia, one of the top corner recruits in the country, Shamari Earls. That would have been unthinkable even 2 or 3 years ago. Hell, last year that would have been unthinkable. Okay, so whether it's you guys rating, Alabama's roster for 5 stars or what we're doing right now to Georgia and now LSU, the game is changing now that this stuff is above board, and now the stigma in our part of the country of doing this is totally removed now. Okay. we always viewed your school as the closest thing to the SEC because maybe guys got to take internet classes and drive a car and get a tattoo. That's nothing compared to what's been going on down south for the last 30 years. Nothing. Well, they wanted a market-based economy for labor. We're going to teach them a thing or two about market-based economies because they cannot compete with the capacity that we can bring to the table. And it'll be fascinating to see what that ultimately does. Now, you still have to be able to coach these kids, right? And I also think Michigan will end up with a very big name offensive coordinator when this is all said and done as well. But I don't know that he can lead a program. We'll find out. But we're going to find out because Michigan is now going to leverage every one of its internal systemic resources to give him every advantage to doing so that he does not Brady Hoke on us. And then if he still does, that's on him. And then another coach will know, well, hell, man, if I know how to do this job and Michigan's out there spending that kind of money, let's go win. So it's a no-lose scenario. We'll find out that we'll either find out if Sharon Moore can lead a program or we just advertise it to the country. We're open for business. We'll get it. Then we'll get a great coach. I'm not worried about it one way or the other.
Did I hear my school in that? Steve, I'm a neutral national football commentator. I don't know what you're talking about.
Indeed.
When you talk about somebody being able to...
MarkRogersTV. My bad. Yes.
When you talk about somebody proving to be able to lead a program or not, leads me to Deion Sanders. Has he proven anything to you this year? Or is this just him able to grab a couple offensive linemen to patchwork a team and they still have to throw Hail Marys to beat the likes of Baylor, so it's not that impressive?
I think you have to give him a lot of credit. And that Baylor Hail Mary basically turned their entire program around. And they're winning games differently every week. There's a buy-in there for sure. There's a lot of egos there, and he's getting a lot of those egos to buy in. I mean, I'm based on what I've seen. I mean, they run an exciting style of offense. He's developed his son from a HBU quarterback to maybe the number one pick in the draft. And if you can manage those egos on a collegiate level, then you can certainly do so at the NFL level. I'm not so sure if I was an NFL general manager, I would not be looking at him for an NFL position this year. Because I actually think some of the stuff that from a college perspective, where people have kind of rolled their eyes at, I actually think that kind of stuff most of the time, we always say the gimmicks of a college coach won't play in the NFL, right? I actually think this one is in reverse. I actually think having a guy who is such a great player and comes with that kind of swag, he's basically the godfather of the modern NFL player. He is he's the OG of the modern NFL player. And I think that a lot of NFL players that would resonate with them and they would play very hard for him. And he's into playing an exciting brand of football. He's somebody that would win you a lot of press conferences and off seasons in the NFL, because remember, that's a year-round sport. I'm not so sure that I wouldn't look at him for an NFL job. I kind of wonder if that maybe is a better long-term future for him than college football.
Steve Deace, Michigan Podcasts, and the Bigger 10. That should be a destination for all of you each and every week. He's got an excellent guest that he typically has on the Michigan Podcast as well. So you want to check him out.
Unknown State fan. Unnamed. Yes.
Unnamed. I am working on a coach's hot seat list. Of course, we're only just over 2 weeks away from Black Sunday following the regular season, but it's a difficult list because we have a lot of second-year head coaches, guys that you don't think are, while they're not doing well, that the administration will pull the plug on. Do you think anyone, who comes to mind as really being in danger?
Well, I think they're the obvious ones. I mean, with Billy Napier taken off the table, I think Dave Aranda's probably off the table. So several of the names that we looked at that were pretty cut and dried situations at the beginning of the year, I don't think are on. Let me give you a name that I do think is on the table. I think if Bryce Underwood decommits, Brian Kelly is on the table. And I think the only thing that'll save him is that buyout. They don't have the benefit of Texas A&M boosters who can send a thank you card to Israel, Hamas, and Hezbollah for oil prices so they can buy out Jimbo Fisher. Like they don't have that. But the last week, I mean, players are cussing the coach is cussing the players on camera. That effort last week, he's not the most likable guy, man, when you're winning. All right. He's hard. He's an absolute Yank. The OC now, their message boards are and their social media is demanding his firing. Let me give you a stat, Mark. You ready for this? Last 3 games, Michigan's averaged 18.6 points per game. LSU's averaged 17.3. Michigan's played 2 top 5 teams in that 3 games. So I have no idea where Joe Sloan, genius. I'm not entirely sure. I mean, we're playing a MAC level quarterback. What's his excuse? With with the Nussmeier kid, what's their excuse? I have no idea where he got some credentials of some kind of offensive genius. I have no idea, but I could see that falling apart. Now, whether the money is there right now to get rid of him but I think that would be the only reason that they would want to retain him. And it could be a situation too if you're an LSU where you convince your boosters to do it because in this cycle, the last couple of years, we've had some crazy cycles where all these top tier jobs came open, right? This could be a relatively quiet cycle from a tier 1 standpoint. And that could work against Kelly. That's basically where LSU's boosters say, okay, we'll pay the stupid tax because we get our pick of the litter. There's no school even approaching us in terms of clout and resources. And so to find a coach. So I would keep an eye on that one.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And the Southern accent and the pounding the podium after the news conference, has the look of the, yes, are you effing coachable? Yes, he just doesn't. I mean, it's almost like a Dan Mullen.
Whether you like it or not, Mark, just some, in every era, there are just certain mores that you just can't violate. Okay. And so let's just be honest. A 60-some-odd-year-old white coach in the face of a young 20-something-year-old black man on national television and saying, you're uneffing coachable, like he's Bear Bryant talking to the Junction Boys in 1955. That, brother, that's just not cool, dog. You know what I'm saying? Not cool, bro. Not for this era.
So the look aside, Steve, do we put Lincoln Riley in the same bucket from a performance standpoint as Brian Kelly? They moved the same off season.
Yep. Yes. And that's why they made the quarterback change. Because USC is not LSU. It's a private school with Notre Dame, Stanford level of endowment. It can do whatever it wants, whenever it wants, basically. So they can afford to get rid of him. And I think that's why the quarterback change was made. I mean, how often does a quarterback in the top 20 in quarterback efficiency in the country get benched? Almost never. You ever heard of something like that?
No.
You watch more of the college football than more of the college football. Donald Trump. The college football. You watch more college football than even I do. I mean, did you forget how many games you would come away from a USC loss thinking that Miller Moss guy is really the problem? Have you thought that one time? No. But Lincoln Riley had to bench him because he's got to restart his clock, right? He needs them to come away with, hey, we beat UCLA, avenged that loss last year, played Notre Dame tight. This is a young quarterback. He's on the come. Give me some time. He needs something to sell because they could absolutely. They're not the LSU donor base. They could, on top of the liquidity from the Big Ten and their massive endowments, they could absolutely move on from him if they want.
Steve Deace, Michigan podcast. It's a great listen. And Steve, we appreciate you being here. Would love to get you back next week for the game.
I'll try to come in and take my whooping. I'm a man.
Well, it's about time. It's about time. And I still don't think it's guaranteed. I've got enough, scars from the past.
I'm pretty confident it's guaranteed.
It should be. It should be, but I've said that before. Steve, appreciate you being here.
You got it, brother. Thank you.